All right, good afternoon and welcome to Module 4. We're going to look at several topics in this module. We're going to look at implicit bias. We're going to look at prejudices and discrimination. And so let me go ahead and share my screen with you so that you can see what I am looking at. Okay. So for the online folks, in this PowerPoint, I gave you an activity that was to do with a photo sort. I wanted you to get at least 10 pictures and then from different magazines and sort them according to different categories. But for the sake of that, let's just go ahead and let's do a different activity, okay? So here's what I want you to think about. And I want you to pause the video after I read this for you. I need you to help me solve this problem. Okay, a father and a son were involved in a car accident in which the father was killed and the son was seriously injured. The father was pronounced dead at the scene of the accident and his body was taken to a local morgue. The son was taken by ambulance to a nearby hospital and was immediately wheeled into an emergency operating room. A surgeon was called. Upon arrival and seeing the patient, the attending surgeon exclaimed, "Oh my God, it's my son. Can you explain this?" Stop the video and pause and think about who this surgeon might be. Okay, welcome back. How many of you immediately thought that the surgeon was the son's mother? Okay, I want you to think about why it is that you thought that, and how many of you thought the surgeon was someone else other than the mother? Okay, pause and reflect on that. The question that I'm posing would be to help us start to unpack ideas about how we have these unexamined biases because of how we've been socialized into accepting certain things as the way it is or the way it has been or the way it will be. So many times when we hear certain job positions, immediately what comes to mind would be something in regards to gender. So most times research has shown that when folks try to solve this problem, in fact, with my face-to-face class, I had some students who thought, oh, was the dad still alive? Or could it be that this is a couple that had two fathers, as opposed to even looking at the situation where the surgeon could be the child's mother. So we're going to discuss, this is just simply designed to get you thinking. So we're going to discuss issues of implicit bias. We're going to talk about prejudice as well as discrimination, okay? So what is an implicit bias? One thing that I want you to do is take out a sheet of notebook paper. And on the sheet of notebook paper, I want you to lay it landscape. And I want you to write down 10 names of people who you have some association with, okay, other than family members. So I want you to write down the names of 10 people who you have associations with. Pause the video and do this activity. All right, welcome back. Now, I want you to, I'm going to show you exactly what your form should look like, because I want you to engage in another activity, okay? Let me find where where the activity is so that I can upload it for you. So you'll be able to see this, okay? All right, what I want you to do now is I'm gonna share the screen so that you can see this. All right, so on your paper, I want you to write the names of 10 people, and then I want you to put in codes for their gender, their age, their race, their education, their sexual orientation, physical or emotional or learning abilities. And then I want you to look at their first language. You can look at their, when in the column that says learning abilities, that's learning abilities or disabilities, or physical or emotional disabilities or abilities, okay? So for instance, if someone is not, if someone is able-bodied, you would just simply put able. If someone has a disability, then you would label that, okay? And then for the others, just how that person identifies. So go ahead and take an opportunity to do that. Write down your list of 10 people and then code it based on this, this grid, okay? Do that now. All right, the next part of this exercise that I want you to engage in is I want you to now draw 3 circles. Turn your paper on the back that you just had. Sorry, I'm leaning over. I had to get a sheet of paper so I can show you what I want you to do. Turn your paper on the back, and I want you to make a circle. Okay? This is your level 1 circle. Okay, this will be called level 1. The names of the 10 people that you have would go in this circle. Okay, so write that down. Once you have finished that, then I want you to draw a circle within the circle. And this is going to be considered your level 2. And this circle would be the folks that you're comfortable. Of the 10 that you've listed, these are the folks that you would probably hang out with, go to the movies with, and invite them over, see them more than occasionally, okay? That's your level 2. And then in your center circle, which would be your level 3, of the people you've had, of the 10 that you had, went down a few, now in your level 3, I want you to write the names of the people who you trust. These are the people who you know would be your trusted besties or folks that will keep your close confidence, okay? Now, once you're finished that, I want you to examine who's in your center circle. Who are your trusted folks? And then I want you to go back and look at your list of your 10 trusted folks. And I want you to see, are they very similar to you when it comes to these identifying factors, or are they different from you when it comes to these identifying factors? And in what way, okay? And I want you to reflect on that. Typically, what we find is that most folks who are in our level 3 circle are folks who look like us, or close to the same age or gender, usually speak the same language that we do, relatively in the same amount of has the same amount of education that we have. So those are the folks that we consider our inner circle. The question now becomes, how do we, if our inner circle are the people that we hang with the most, people who think like us, act like us, sometimes look like us, if they're the folks that we are always with, then how do we dismantle that, if that's a word that I choose to use? And then, let's, instead of saying dismantle, how do we broaden our level 3 circle to include more folks that may bring something or identifying factor to the table that might not be exactly like ours is? Okay, so I want you to reflect on that. How do you broaden your circle? What are some of the action items that would make it happen? And then, more importantly, why would you want to do this anyway? Okay, consider those two things. All right, let's go back now to the PowerPoint. And in the PowerPoint, what I want us to think about, let me share with you that. What I want us to think about would be those things. Like when we look at our inner circle, we are looking at folks who live and behave in ways that are similar to ours. And so this draws us to start thinking about this concept of implicit bias. And so just like I shared with you last week or the week before, that we all are socialized into believing or seeing things based on how we were raised, the way that we consume a variety of media. Those things have implications because it impacts how we see ourselves and how we see others. And so from that, we all have implicit biases. And so when we say implicit biases, like these are, it refers to a bias that we are unaware of, and it happens outside of our control. So you just simply have a preference, okay? It is a bias that happens automatically, and it's triggered by how our brains make quick judgments and assessments of people and situation, and that influenced by our background, our culture, our environment, and our personal experience. And so we have some associations. So like there are certain words that trigger images inside of us, and we may not know that we have an implicit bias until we become critically conscious of that. So for instance, if I were to say the word pageant queen, there is an image that your brain immediately conjures up, like who's that? If I were to say the word surgeon, there's an image that your mind immediately conjures up. If I were to say the word teacher, there's an image that your brain automatically conjures up. And so based on those implicit biases, we tend to operate in a world where we see things according to how we've been socialized. So implicit biases, they have an effect if they go unexamined. They affect our perceptions, our attitudes, our behaviors, our attention, our listening skills, and our microaffirmations. So in regards to that, when we think of the way that this happens, when we say that it affects our perception, it's how we perceive people and perceive reality. So for instance, if I said pageant queen, there is a certain perception of what that would look like. It affects our attitudes, how we react to certain people. So if someone were to say the dean of a college, there is a certain way that we engage with a dean of a college as opposed to someone else, okay? It also affects our behaviors or how we react. Are we friendly toward certain people, or are we unfriendly toward others? It affects our attention. Like what aspect of the person are you paying attention to? And in particular, when you think about kids, what aspect of their personality are you paying attention to? And then how do you actively engage with people, with what they say? And then microaffirmation, how much or how little comfort do you have with certain people and in certain situations, okay? So we all have implicit biases, and they go unexamined if we do not think about them. From those implicit biases, we form these things. We have prejudices or prejudgment about a member of a social group to which we don't belong. So for instance, if I were to say the word criminal, there is an image that comes to mind. And we have certain prejudices about a person who's a criminal. And then we interact with that person based on that perception, okay? So we've all been socialized. We have implicit biases. We also have that cause us to create certain prejudices. When we think about a prejudice, it is based on limited knowledge or experience with that group. And so that goes back to this issue of who is in your center circle, okay? Because if whoever is in our center circle tends to look and behave more like us than not. When we think of a prejudice, it's the internal thoughts and feelings or attitudes that we have based on a group to which we do not belong, or one that someone else belongs to. And those things can be positive or negative. Prejudice begins with stereotypes or reduced, simplified characteristics attributed to a certain group. And so one week, I think we talked about, like, there is this belief that Asians are smart in math, or girls can be docile and subservient, or boys can be rough and tumble. So those are stereotypes that we've been socialized into believing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone who falls into that group or identify as a certain way actually normalize that behavior, okay? A prejudice come into play when we add value to those stereotypes. So for instance, when I refer to Asians as being smart in, say, math, and we think that that is a wonderful thing, then we act in a way that often privileges a child or a person based on that stereotype, and that gives that person an unfair advantage, an undue unfair advantage, okay? So we have to be very conscious about how we were socialized, the biases that we have, and how they are enacted in our behavior, okay? So then the question might be, well, is it bad to have a prejudice? No, it's not, but it becomes bad when we allow the way that we use those beliefs to discriminate against others. So when we think about the term discrimination, what are we referring to? We're referring to our actions based on the prejudices that we hold toward a social other. And then how we think about a group determines how we act toward them. So then my question that I want you to think about is, then how do we avoid discriminating? Think about that. Pause the video and stop and reflect on that. Write some notes. How do you avoid discriminating based on prejudices that you have? Okay? All right, welcome back. So, what are some of the acts that we can define as discrimination? If you look on page 54 of your text, it lists several of them. So when we think about discrimination, we embody them in these following ways. An act of discrimination can be ignoring someone, avoiding someone, excluding someone, ridiculing, making jokes, slandering, posing threats, and or violence, okay? Now, a lot of times people would think that that when people discriminate, that they're doing it consciously. And to some degree, that is true. But there are other ways that we discriminate on an unconscious level. And the only way for us to not discriminate is to do two things. We have to first be cognizant of the prejudice that we have or the biases that we have. And then we have to take concerted efforts to break out and learn more about the group that we are forming discriminatory acts toward, so that we can then dismantle those beliefs that may limit folks who belong to a certain group, but not be all inclusive in that group in regards to the way that they act and behave and live in the world. So when we want to put an end to discrimination, we need to first be conscious that we're doing it, and then we need to take concerted efforts to stop doing that. And one way to do that is to actually learn more about the group, educating yourself, and then finding folks who belong in that group so that you can allow them to educate you even further. Okay? In order to challenge our prejudices, we have to challenge social segregations that are built into the culture. And so that's the goal of this, for us to begin thinking about that there are many ways that we've been socialized. No one way is the right way or the only way. And then to accept each other for who they are and to value them just as much as you value yourself. And in doing that, the more educated we become about people who are different from us, the more relationships we tend to build, and the more like we are going to be able to have constructive response when interacting with them. So going back to your trusted 10, the more we're educated, the more this circle expands out, that we can then have more folks who are not like us included in how we engage in the world. That's all that I have in regards for prejudice, discrimination, and implicit bias. But there are 2 activities in this module that I want you to engage in. The first is the comfort in social situation activity. And let me see if I can find that so I can show that to you. Just a second. Let's see. All right. You're going to find this in your module. And what you're going to do, you're going to read through the statements, and then you're going to rate your level of comfort with each. You're not going to, I want you to just simply be honest with this. You will upload this to your section, to your Blackboard page. So here we go. You're going to rate your level of comfort, 5 being the most comfort, all the way down to 1 being the least comfortable. And there are several categories. At the end of this activity, you will then compute your total for each section by adding up the numbers from your responses. If you marked an NA score, it as a 3 before computing your total score for the section. Higher number indicate greater discomfort, lower number indicate less discomfort. Okay, I'm more comfortable. And then you will look at these areas: race, gender, sexuality, disability, weight, and age, okay? And then you will upload this to Blackboard. That's one assignment that I would like for you to do. Also, there are other assignments in this task. I would love for you to go to the Harvard Institute and complete one of the implicit bias tests. You do not have to all complete the same one. You make a choice which one you want to do. And then I want you to think about your results and reflect on that, okay? And then the last thing, you will look at the 2 YouTube videos that are attached in this module. All right, have a wonderful week.